So my name is Misha Eid, and I'm a farmer at Bright Eyed Acres in Ording, Washington, but I also manage a program called Pierce County Fresh. And Pierce County Fresh is sponsoring this workshop. And I'm acting as moderator. I have a lot of questions about this topic, as I think many of us do. And so I'm really, really excited to have our panelists here with me so that we can learn a little bit about what different folks are doing to manage employees on their farm. If you are a Washington State farmer, I want to make sure you're aware of Eat Local First, eatlocalfirst.org. It's a website where you can get your farm listed. It's free, and we have a lot of statewide attention on that project. And so it helps consumers find you. There's a CSA finder, there's a new wholesale finder. So if you have some time this winter, it's a great opportunity to go and get listed and help us help you market your products. And as you probably heard the lady tell you, we're recording this. And so after the workshop is over, I'm going to upload it to the YouTube channel, and I'll send you out that link as well. So if you haven't already in the chat, please go ahead and drop us your name, your farm name, if applicable, the location, and your email address so that we can reach out to you afterwards. And then also, if questions pop up during the workshop, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll try to answer them as they come up. If the questions are about topics we haven't covered yet or about your operation specifically, let's try to leave those until the Q&A session at the end. And some of our panelists have said that they can stay on past 5:30 if we have some interest and people will have more questions. So don't stress if you feel like you're running out of time. And so with that, I'm going to introduce my panelists. I have 4 great farmers with me, 3 from Washington State and 1 from Vermont. And I will start with Taylor Mendel. She's a native Californian turned year-round farmer in Zone 4 in Vermont. She, her husband Jake, and 1-year-old Theo and a crew of 4 employees run Footprint Farm in Starksboro, Vermont. Together, they grow diversified vegetables on 1.5 acres outdoors and 1/4 acre in unheated high tunnels. The farm partners with other local producers of staples like bread, meat, eggs, and cheese to provide food to 180 to 200 CSA members from April through December. They also sell to local restaurants and caterers and partner with local gleaners, food banks, and doctors' offices to donate produce year-round. In addition to helping run the farm, Taylor is the voice behind Habit Farming, an online resource for business management and evaluation tools. Thanks so much for being here with us, Taylor. Next is Raleigh Johnson. Raleigh has owned Early Bird Farm in the Puyallup Valley near Tacoma, Washington since 2013, where he produces vegetables and eggs. Currently, he has 2 acres in vegetable production and employs 3 to 4 seasonal employees to get the job done. Products are sold primarily through a 130-share 20-week CSA program and at local farmers markets. Early Bird Farm also sells wholesale eggs to Marlene's Market in Tacoma. Thanks, Raleigh, for being here. We also have Ryan Lichtenegger, who started Steelwell Farm in 2019 on 1 acre and now farms 14 acres of leased land on the Snoqualmie River in Falls City, Washington. There they grow mixed fruits, vegetables, grain crops, graze hogs, and operate a pumpkin patch and corn maze in October. They have a crew of 6 full-time seasonal employees, 2 to 3 part-time employees, and Ryan's partner Kim runs the books, taxes, and marketing. Steel Wheel has been slinging produce at farmers markets since year 1, and they also sell products through Farm Stand Local Foods, the Snow Valley Farmers Co-op, and direct to restaurants. Thanks, Ryan. And last up, we have Ari Delania, who is the owner of Kumayan Farm, a small vegetable and flower farm located on Coast Salish land in Carnation, Washington. She specializes in growing Southeast and East Asian vegetable varieties and is part of Second Generation Seeds, an Asian seed growers collective. Ari has over 10 years of experience supporting communities of color and farmers in their struggles for food sovereignty, environmental justice, and climate justice. Thanks so much for joining us, Ari. All right, so we have a lot of topics to cover. I've got some ideas of how we want to break this down, but basically I'm just going to start asking questions and I'm going to have our panelists just pipe in. And then the rest of you, if you have questions in the chat, or you can use the little raise hand function and we will see what we can accomplish here. But when we're talking about employees, you have to start at the beginning, right? Which is hiring. And so I find for my farm, hiring is really challenging. And I know it kind of depends on where you live and your community, but I'm curious about how folks are finding the right people and what information or tips they might have. Like, where are you looking? Is it just word of mouth? Are you posting on job boards? So Taylor, do you want to take a stab at this first one? Where are you finding folks? How are you hiring? Oh, you are muted.
I am unmuted. So it's, I think, important to know that we are in a very highly agricultural area. So I think we have a bigger pool than many areas. That said, we focus a lot on retention so that we aren't hiring a lot. So we have traditionally just hired one person per year, one new person. And that is usually through word of mouth. And again, because the community is so big here, that seems to be our number one way to find people.
Retention is the goal. And hopefully by the end of today, we will all have great ideas on how to improve our retention rates. Raleigh, do you have any suggestions, especially for Western Washington? Like, how are you finding folks?
We're really close to Tacoma and Seattle, so we have a pretty good pool of people that our location is really nice. So I haven't had that hard of a time finding people. We usually listed the internship on the ATRA website, but also on the Washington TILF producers website. I really try to get local applicants. We're not quite set up to have people from other parts of the country come live here until the last couple of years, but I don't have a ton of advice because we've always found good people, but I'll talk more about that later.
Oh, any of our panelists struggle with this? Ryan, have you had good luck?
Yeah, we've been pretty lucky and have had pretty good retention, mostly word of mouth. In the early days, we had interns and we'd find a lot of young people interested in farming through the sustainable agricultural classes at Seattle Central College. So I would do a talk yearly at one of their classes, and typically a couple of folks would be interested in coming out to the farm and eventually started working for us.
Okay, how about you, Ari?
Yeah, so I usually promote just via Instagram, and we also have a newsletter that goes out to, I think it's like 650 people. And that's usually been enough to find folks to come work on the farm. I think it's also really helpful just to be engaged in your local agricultural community because so much of stuff is word of mouth. This past year, I had an employee that came from Ryan's farm. So I think there is a lot of movement throughout the community. But I also have the benefit of being really close to Seattle. So I am pulling from a fairly large applicant pool.
Okay, well, those are all great tips. I personally struggled this year trying to hire, and I do not recommend using the job posting websites that are meant for all jobs. I wound up with a lot of not interested high school students. So there are great resources out there. I'll include some of these in the email that I send out, but I think the idea of kind of reaching out to community colleges is really interesting. I'm sure a lot of folks around the nation have access to some agricultural classes.
Do you all
so
have
I guess,
do you have like ours is NOFA, the organic like group. Do you have one of those? Ours has a job posting site page on their website that's been helpful too.
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit before the meeting, but we don't really have a great job posting resource for farmers. We do have something called the Tilt Alliance, and they will share job postings in their newsletter. But I think this is a big gap in Washington, and I think it's something that should definitely be rectified. And maybe this is a good way to start that conversation. And so while we're talking about hiring, I listened to Taylor, you were in a previous workshop about similar topic, and I watched that, and you had some really good points about what to look for in an interview, things people say that are red flags for you. And you made me laugh and kind of surprised me, because you had this comment where if in an interview somebody says they want to get their hands in their dirt, that's a red flag for you. Whereas, most of us would be like, yeah, that's my people. So do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I know. I think that's kind of can be an incendiary comment, but yeah, if somebody says, I just want to get my hands dirty in their cover letter, I usually don't interview them unless there's something else in there that says that they would fit in here well. But I've found that there's a few catchphrases or books that people bring up that tells me that they haven't worked on a farm before, and that they're going to be a little bit have too much of a romantic vision of what it's going to be like. So yeah, that is one of my red flag comments. And then we try really hard to hire personalities. So I'm not, even though I say I don't want somebody who's totally green, I will take somebody who hasn't worked on a farm or on a farm like ours before, if their personality seems like they'll fit into the type of farm that we have. Because I think that we've had experiences where our crew is so small that if they aren't competitive, for example, and they're not competitive in a particular way, then they won't like being here. And it's not fun for anybody if they're just super turned off by anything team related or like matching t-shirts, which to me sounds so fun, but it's so true that we had one person who hated team things to the point where we just had to not do it for a year, and that wasn't fun. So I have interview questions that try to tease that out of people too. And so using that as an example, I'll ask if they've ever, like growing up, were you on any team sports, or were you part of a choir? Did you play an instrument? Things like that, that is getting to know them, but is also trying to understand different pieces of personalities that we've seen in the past that haven't really jived with the way that we work.
That's great insight. Ari, do you have tips for when you're doing interviews? Do you have certain things you're looking for, questions you ask?
Yeah, I'm really specific about the questions that I ask. Like, I think everyone should eliminate the opening question of tell me about yourself from interviews, because I think it's kind of a worthless question. No offense if anybody uses that. But I think, similar to Taylor, I'm really trying to look for either red flags or characteristics that I think will help somebody fit in really well on my farm. And just some context for my farm is I'm the only boss, like there's no other manager. And so it also has to be somebody that I feel like I want to spend a lot of time with. But I'm also screening. So when I ask for cover letters, I usually ask people to answer specific questions. And right off the bat, if people just skip those questions and don't answer them, I won't even read, because that means that they're not very good at reading instructions potentially. I also like to ask people, how do they like to give and receive feedback? I ask people to describe a situation where they made a mistake and how they took accountability and what they learned from that. Some of them are pretty basic, but I just want to get at like how people work in relationship with other folks. And then I like to ask people how they motivate themselves when working conditions are hard. I think that helps deal with some of the romanticism as well. Like, I also find it a little bit off-putting when people, when I put out my job description this past spring, a lot of people said like they really wanted to come work the land and to heal, essentially. Which I thought was really fascinating and was like a really good reflection for me about how I talk about my farm and how I describe my farm publicly. But I knew that likely wasn't the right candidate for the kind of work I needed to have done that season. And then I always ask people like what they think they would need from me to be successful and to enjoy their time on the farm, because for example, if somebody says like, oh, I need really close supervision, or sometimes I need people to explain things to me multiple times, I know that that's probably not the right fit for me just because I have a lot of other things to manage and take care of. Um, I have some like personal biases. Like if people have worked in the service industry for a long time, I'm usually like, oh, that's a good candidate because folks like that are usually good at multitasking and decision making and, um, understand what it's like to have a physical job when you're on your feet for many hours. So uh, yeah, I read people's cover letters and resumes really thoroughly when I get them.
We had a question in the chat if folks might want to share their interview questions. And so if any of the panelists are interested in that, maybe you can email them to me and I'll include them in the follow-up email for folks. If you have like a standard set of questions you ask, that would be helpful. Noah asks if anyone has a farm trial day as part of their interview process. So maybe like a working interview, Ryan or Raleigh?
Yeah, I can go. Kind of our procedure is doing the first interview over the phone or like a Zoom conversation. You can kind of get a feel of what that person is like. The second interview would be an on-farm work day, maybe a half a day. So the crew could kind of get a feel for who this person is. Then we can have a conversation afterwards to see if they would actually mesh with everybody. Not that that's the most important thing, but definitely want everybody to jive. And we usually say no soul searchers, and they must follow directions. So Ari brought up a good point about, if they don't send you the things you specifically ask for, I don't even look at it. Motivation, I'm always like sensing motivation to be a farmer or to really help on a team. I think that's pretty obvious when you meet some people. Yeah, I think that answers the question, right?
Yeah, thank you. So related to all of this, go ahead, Raleigh.
Yeah, just quickly, I agree with everything everyone said. Just to add something new, we've never had anyone quit on us. That's my biggest motivation is like, I just don't want the person to quit in the middle of the season. So what I focus on with hiring is finding someone who the farm aligns with their interests. Like I want someone who is going to be excited to be here and is going to get a lot out of the experience. So when I look at their resumes, when I talk to them, I really make it clear what we do here. And I try to see how interested they are in that. Because, we have 500 chickens. That's not for everybody. We're small scale. It's a small crew. That's not for everybody. So focusing on that. And I know if they're getting out of the experience, they're going to stick around. And then I don't sugarcoat it. So I make it really clear, like what the job description is. If they're going to have to come in early to do chicken chores a couple days a week, I want them to know that. So there's no surprises when they show up here and then they end up quitting because they're unhappy. Like they really know what they're getting into. And we do hire people. We have done internships where they've never worked on a farm before. So I do try to find people who say that they're interested in farming as a career and starting their own farm rather than someone who's like a YOLO looking for a life experience.
Wow, YOLO as a noun. I love that. It does bring me to my next question, which is the intern question, right? And so I don't know how many of our listeners are kind of new to hiring, but I know a lot of us in the farm world think that starting with an intern makes sense. And a lot of us don't quite know what that means legally. I know I am guilty of having a gray area intern when I first started. And having an intern is often even more challenging than having a paid employee. So I know Ryan and Raleigh, you both have had interns. Go ahead, Ryan, tell us about that.
Yeah, we started out with interns. One of them was a relative of mine too, which I would warn anybody against hiring cousins or other family members. It didn't work out so well. But as we grew a little bit, we discovered that the Labor and Industries had a program for farmer interns, and it was a program designed to allow young farmers to get onto a farm legally and get paid an under minimum wage stipend, with also a curriculum attached to that learning experience. So our responsibility is to come up with that curriculum, teach the individuals the basics about farming and like what we do. Sometimes they can live on the farm. I think that was one of the stipulations, was we had to have farm worker housing for them also. So we did that for a 3-year program, but currently we don't have interns. I would say overall, our experience was really good. I think before that program was available to us, we had some like kind of gray area interns, and it could be kind of messy to operate that way. It's tough. We need workers, and we don't have a lot of cash flow to pay them early on. So there's definitely like a gap there, and it makes it really difficult. And I know some other farms, they pay employees 1099s as contractors, and that's also pretty sketchy and could be a big risk for you. But the best thing about the internship program was that the employees are covered in case of injury. And that's the scariest thing for me, is any day somebody can slip and fall off the back of the truck or in the field or cut themselves with a knife. And, what do you do if they're not a technical employee? So that really, it made it possible for us to afford, I guess, greenhorn labor is how we'd say it.
Yeah, I can expand on that internship program a little bit too. I had 2 interns through that program this year, and the benefit of it, other than what Ryan just shared, is that you can choose to pay people or not pay people, and you sort of decide the rate and how you're going to pay them. So I paid people what I would have paid them if they were employees, but the sort of background administrative lift of running that program is a little bit lower than it would be if you had full-fledged employees. The tax requirements are somewhat different. So I definitely encourage people to look into that, but it is attached to a curriculum that you need to send to LNI, and they review, although it's very loose. But it was a really helpful way for me to get people in there. And also education is a really important part of what I want to be doing on my farm. So it sort of aligned well with my goals.
Yeah, so Jillian asked if there's a link. Just if you just Google Washington State Farm Intern Program, it'll take you right to it. I would just add that, the discussion about internships has shifted in the past few years. I think a lot of people think that any labor that's less than minimum wage is exploitative. So I think we need to acknowledge that and be really aware of that when we think about setting up an internship program on our farm. And I learned to farm as an intern. I'm eternally grateful for the farmers who gave me a chance to farm as an intern, someone who had no experience and who just made so many mistakes my first couple of seasons. So I think there is a place for a farm internship. I think if you're a farmer who's going to run an internship program, you just need to be really passionate about the education piece and make sure that you are focusing on the educational component and it's not just cheap labor. And if anybody wants to see my intern curriculum outline, I'd be happy to email it to you. It doesn't have to be that much in the state of Washington, but giving your crew, I give my crew an outline of the curriculum for the year, and we just focus on, after lunch, we have a communal lunch once a week, and then we have a topic we discuss after that lunch. And that's sort of the sit down classroom component, and the rest of it is learning on the job. So it's primarily learning on the job, but we have that once a week component. And I think that helps people see, even if the first couple of months, all they're doing is seeding and they feel like they're not learning anything, they have that curriculum and they know at some point they're going to get to everything else. I think it's helpful for them to see that. And so it can be the right position for a certain type of person, as long as you're handling it appropriately.
Those are really important clarifications. Thank you, Raleigh. Okay, so you've hired somebody or you've got a new intern. what do you do trial periods? I've seen some people do that. Taylor, I think I heard in your last workshop that, do you do that? You have like a set period of time, maybe it's a slightly different pay rate just to try it out. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we do a 2-week trial period, which we sit down at the beginning of it, and they have a starting rate pay, and that's kind of like my entry level pay. And they have a self-guided training. So I just have a laminated checklist. And it's like, our farm is really complicated. There's a lot to learn here. I don't expect you to know it all in the first 2 weeks or even in the first 2 months. But in the first 2 weeks, I expect you to be able to do these things. And it's mostly finding things. So, where is the first aid kit? Where can you get backup soap when we run out? How do you feed the pigs? Like really simple things. And then I have either assigned other crew members or managers to say, okay, go learn this from this person. Or I say, just go find somebody, if somebody else seems like they have a moment. And that really helps with getting the crew to know each other a little bit better, and also to have different voices teaching, because the way that I explain something is not always the way that hits for people. And then we sit down at the end of the 2 weeks and I say, how did it feel for you? This is how it felt for me. Either your skills were or were not where we expected, and I either keep their pay the same or I give them a raise right then, and then we start their regular season. I haven't not hired somebody after the 2 weeks yet.
That's cool. It's kind of like a 2-week scavenger hunt of tasks. I like that a lot. Do any of our other panelists have trial periods? I know I feel like it's hard because by the time you've hired someone, you've kind of invested a lot already, but I know that a lot of us also get to the point where maybe a quarter into the season, we're a little bit frustrated that maybe this person isn't exactly what we thought they were in the interview.
Yeah, and I will
so
say that we hire earlier. Like, we don't really have enough work for our whole crew when we start our full crew, but that's to give us that wiggle room in case it doesn't work out with somebody.
I do call the first month a trial period, and then we always have a 1-month check-in and a one-on-one meeting. And that's really for me to see that they're achieving their learning goals, like it's kind of what they were expecting. And then for me to give them any feedback and trying to keep it positive, like pumping people up, giving them some positive feedback about their first month. But we always do that first month check-in. It's kind of a fake thing that it's a 1-month trial, but I always call it a 1-month trial.
yeah, we're going to talk about feedback. That is, I think, probably the number one employee issue. But Ryan, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, we don't really do like a particular length of trial period. It's usually more of the interview process. And then if somebody's not working out, then we just have that conversation.
All right. Well, let's go on to training. So I know we heard Taylor's method of kind of having this scavenger hunt of either figure it out or ask some staff to help you figure it out so you know what you're doing. I want to talk a little bit about employee handbooks. This is something that we are going to work on this winter for our farm, and I think we should have, had this in place before we hired the very first person. And then everybody who gets an email from me after the class is going to have a template for an employee handbook from Olivia Tincani, who is a really awesome consultant that I use on my farm. And so I've paid for the license for you all to have access to this handbook. And so I would love to hear from our panelists about your employee handbooks if you have them. Ari, do you have one?
I do have one. I'm just trying to think about what might be important to share from that. But I think the intention and purpose of it for me is to just lay out expectations so that people have a reference document. So I have information in there about, obviously what I expect their daily schedule to be like, any important information about how I want to be able to communicate with them, like whether that's I'm going to be consistently communicating via email or text, or usually for me it's text. And then I think it's really important to have just like clear laid out processes in there for if there are problems or if there are challenges in working together, and what sort of like would escalate things to different levels. And then anything that's like an absolute, what's the word? Just like a no on the farm, making sure that those details are in there so that if something does happen and I needed to fire someone, I could, or I needed to, you know, have a sit down with somebody that I could refer back to those things.
What about you, Raleigh? Do you have one? No. Ryan?
Yeah, we have an employee handbook. It was a lot of work like putting it all together, but we are so grateful we have it because when we onboard people for the first time, this is like a packet that just all gets put together with their hire paperwork. They're responsible to read it and then sign the back of it to make sure that they did read it. Has everything in there from about Steel Wheel Farm, like how we started, kind of a welcome, our philosophy. We have general policies, what the days are like, hours of the week, being prepared about the weather, kind of the structure of the farm, like who do you report to, good housekeeping stuff, workplace safety, how to take care of the animals, conduct and behavior, things we don't tolerate, like alcohol or drugs on the property, pay and benefits, holidays. I feel like that's kind of a gray area with a lot of farms because a lot of a lot of jobs have holidays off, but farms sometimes don't. Things about paid time off, benefits, and termination.
That sounds fairly comprehensive.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I got the template from. I want to say it was like maybe Roxbury Farm or maybe the University of Vermont, but somewhere somebody has a template for it.
Yeah, so Ari mentioned in the chat, there's one from Farm Commons. I have that one too, so I'll send that one out as well as Olivia's. I think it's a longer one. One of the things that Olivia, my consultant, mentioned is that you have to be a little bit careful about the information that you're legally required to provide to your employees. So anything related to the labor and industries in Washington State, but basically the workers' comp stuff and just stuff you're supposed to have like visible. So just making sure that if you do an employee handbook, it either has all of that information that they're required to have plus your other information that you want them to have, or like in my case, it's probably just going to be the stuff about our farm and the job and not so much that HR information that's like legally required. So just to make sure that you are double checking all of those requirements when you're providing information to your employees. And I personally am not good at that. I get letters from L&I and I just kind of put them on my desk. So something to work on. So the thing that I also think is really important to talk about is how much time it actually takes to be a good manager. A lot of us are hiring folks because we don't have the time to do all of the jobs. We don't necessarily think about the added work in managing folks, right? You can't just set them up and then go and do your own job. Like you still have to manage them. And so I'm wondering what behind the scenes things you all are doing that your employees maybe don't even really know about, but are you setting schedules for yourself to come up with to-do lists? Also, do you have regular meetings scheduled with your staff? Are there kind of tips and tricks you want to share with us? Is there technology that you're using for sharing information with your staff or just for yourselves with your organization? Anyone want to jump in on that?
I'll start because this is our big question this winter. Maybe not the one of a couple, but we've always felt like it was really important for us to be with our crew, working alongside them. And we had a baby this year. And so for the first time, it wasn't possible for us to be working side by side the way that we were used to. And so we had to go through a big, like it was an us problem. Like it was a big emotional, like, oh, we feel guilty, or we just feel so bad that they're out there working in the rain and we're inside like dealing with a screaming baby or making invoices or whatever it was. And so we noticed that our crew was just so proud of themselves when they were running the farm without us, and we were able to have a lot of really good conversations about what that relationship means. We have been training one of our employees to be more of a manager. So we have sort of a 3-person management team now. But with such a small crew, I find that it's hard because we haven't been hierarchical really, or as much as we now need to be. And so we're doing a lot of things. So we're doing a management training with Zing Train, which is Zingerman's Bakery in Ann Arbor, Michigan. But they have, now that the pandemic happened, you don't have to go to Ann Arbor to do the trainings, but they're awesome. I know a lot of farms who have done them. And then there's a book and podcast called Radical Candor, which is more about like having a common language for speaking from management to employees. And so we're looking at both of those things. And as far as communication with the crew goes, we need schedules. Like we need job descriptions. We need people's jobs to be different rather than just crew member or like field worker. They need more clearly defined roles. They've also been here longer, so it makes sense at this point. And we need to, lost my train of thought. There's so many things we need to do. But we're really the scheduling. So we're trying to schedule in time for us to do office work and management work. So right now we're doing it outside of employee hours. We do a field walk on Saturdays, which gives us our inventory for the week, and we plan our to-dos and figure it out day by day. And then we disseminate that information in a daily morning meeting, which we do we have like weekly goals and then what we're going to do for the day. And that might change a little bit because we're talking about having different schedules. We've always all worked 5 days together, same start time, same end time. But my husband and I did all the CSA pickups, which are at the end of the day. We harvest on the weekends. Like it's just not sustainable anymore. So we are staggering schedules, which is going to mean a lot more management. And one of the tools, I started using this last year. I've always been a big bullet journaler I really like paper for to-do lists, but I've switched over to Onenote, which is a Microsoft thing. And it's wonderful because it's basically an electronic notebook. You can have different sections. So I have like tabs for all my employee meetings. So if you go back to the employee handbook, I use mine as a legal document first. And then I've added to it as people have been like, I want a clearer time off policy, or like they want more in the employee handbook in my experience. But I also want to have written documentation of every conversation I have with people, because one time I needed it in a firing situation and it's coming back to me now in an unemployment situation. And I have written signed documents from me and the employee that I can save myself with, So I really encourage having meetings on paper.
Awesome. That's great information. I think we will hopefully have time to get to a little bit about when things go wrong and how to protect yourselves. Let's see. So do any of the rest of you have different ways that you are setting aside time to manage, Ryan?
Yeah, I definitely don't set enough time aside to manage because I'm on the farm with the crew, and that's what I like to do. I hate doing office work and doing the planning stuff, but it's so necessary. I would just say like the biggest things, having clean communication. If you're going to manage people, really give them positive feedback along with the negative feedback, so it doesn't sound like you're always being negative, and then ways they can improve. So I always keep that like top of my mind. It's always those three things. We definitely have safety meetings. We at the beginning of the season, we do all the things right. We always have meetings on Mondays and have safety meeting Thursday. But then when June hits, like all that shit just falls apart, and it's hard to like stick with it. Totally agree with writing the meetings down. Also, we started video recording our safety meetings, which is really easy, and you don't need paper or anything. You just somebody's in charge of filming it and then emailing it to the Steel Wheel Farm account, so it goes in a folder. Let's see. Yeah, I think as far as our farm roles, we developed last year leadership roles. We were kind of in this situation where we just had a farm crew, but I started to want to assign responsibilities to everybody. So when we hire specifically lead roles. It's not really manager roles, but for instance, we have a greenhouse lead. Somebody's in charge of watering the greenhouse and seeding. Doesn't mean that they're always just doing that stuff, but they're the go-to person. So if that person's not at the farm, we're like, hey, you need to cover when Emily's not here because she's in charge of the greenhouse. We also have a pack shed lead position, and that kind of borders on food safety stuff there. We have a farmer's market lead position and also a field crew lead position. So 4 main leads on our farm, and they report back to me. When I'm not there, the field crew lead is the person they report to.
Awesome. I want to pick apart something that you mentioned about your, when you're communicating. I think that's the next topic I want to cover. I think it's really the most important topic. So I imagine we'll spend some time on it. But one of the resources I'm going to send out is a couple articles from Growing for Market magazine that are really relevant to this issue and very helpful. And one of them talked about what they call the compliment sandwich. So it's making a compliment, providing constructive criticism, and then ending it with a compliment so that it's a positive interaction. And so the example they said was, your chard bunches looked gorgeous today. However, we need to pick up the pace with our morning greens harvest. Could you try moving faster and keep up the awesome aesthetics and uniformity? So, you're complimenting how nice their bunches look, but also telling them they need to go faster. And then this said, of course, bonus points if you go out and show them some tips on how to do that. So I know farmers who struggle really a lot with keeping crew, and they're hiring new people over and over and over again, even within the same season. And at that point, you start to wonder, well, are you really just hiring the wrong people, or is it you? And I think really it's you, right? And the other article did a study, and it was like almost 100% of the farm workers they interviewed said that they wish they had more feedback from their bosses. So I'm curious if you guys have specific ways you communicate, or if you have those regularly scheduled meetings, not just the Monday morning, here's what we're doing, but those feedback meetings where you can get folks tell them how they're doing and then ask them to provide feedback on how you're doing, right? Do you have anything, Ari, like that?
Yes. So at the beginning of the season with my whole crew, I have actually a little handout that we do together. It's called All About Me. And parts of it are kind of silly. Like it has questions like, what's your favorite TV show? Or what's your favorite movie or book? But there are also questions about like, what's your love language? What's your learning style? How do you like to be celebrated? How do you like to receive feedback? How do you like to give feedback? And so it's actually kind of like the document that I refer back to the most throughout the season, because not everybody, I like a compliment sandwich when I'm getting feedback, but not everybody does. Like I think it makes some people really uneasy. And also some people like to receive written feedback. Some people want you to give them feedback in the moment when something happens. And so I try to really tailor my communication with my crew to the individual person, because I just think that's the most effective. And then it's also a way to just show people right off the bat that I want to honor who they are and what their preferences are. Like, you know, the question, how do you like to be celebrated, may seem kind of silly, but if you're constantly like celebrating somebody really publicly and they hate that, it's not a good feeling to be at work and to have that experience. And so, yeah, I also have, usually like my crew this past season was staggered. So we'd have some days where everybody would be there, and then we'd have some days where it would just be me and one other crew member. And so on whatever day that was, we would like have lunch together, and then every other week we'd have a one-on-one check-in after that. And that was just a chance for people to kind of, for us to talk about what was going really well, what was challenging or frustrating. And so, you know, every 2 weeks, I would have a good sense of how people were doing. And then that would also be time to integrate any other potential like learning opportunities if people had questions about something that we were doing, or if they had questions about like, you know, if I'd given them feedback on like bunch sizes or something, we could go look at that together, and kind of course correct if there was anything that needed that. And then I saw somebody dropped a question about handling time off. So I would often, you know, just ask like, okay, like what are your next 2 weeks looking like? What's your next month looking like? Just so I had tabs on everyone's schedule and if anybody needed to be off farm for any reason. And then I found this season that there were some days where we just had to meet off the farm, especially because of the internship program. There were certain pieces of curriculum that I really wanted to share. Like I have kind of like an open book policy. So I showed my crew like all of our farm financials and all of our planning documents and all of our budgets and stuff like that. And so we don't really have like a physical house structure on the farm. So I would like set aside a day where I would often share information like that, and then give them kind of a project for the rest of the day that they could do off farm. So managing takes a lot of time, and I think it can be really hard to be intentional about it during the season. So it's helpful to just have set meetings in place.
Yeah, I think that advice about tailoring your feedback style to an individual really makes a lot of sense. And I see some other questions in the chat. Some of those questions we might push towards the end. We're going to have a Q&A session. Did you have something to add, Ryan?
Oh, I was just going to answer that question about time off. And that kind of brings me back to our technology little segment. We use Trello to keep track of tasks, and everybody, the whole crew is invited to add stuff and look at the whole board. There's lists and procedures that you can put in, but we have a special board that says time off or out of office. So everyone knows when people have planned time off, so nobody's taking time off at the same time, which we've run into a problem with. And then I also can schedule time off, which is tough to do, but then everybody's like, okay, Ryan's out, we got to cover. So that's been really helpful using Trello.
That's great advice. I think we can come back to that question too, because I also feel like when you're hiring folks, you kind of have to make it clear that like if they want to take a long summer vacation, this may not be the job for them, right? But I think we want to talk a little bit about employee buy-in. So, you know, we have these ideas now, okay, we're gonna have regular meetings, we're gonna have good feedback, but you also need to create this team and this environment where they feel really like they want to be at work and they're happy to be there, right? Especially if you're trying to work on that retention. So I'm curious what you all do to kind of create that team cohesion. I know we've heard a little bit here and there sprinkled throughout, but if you have specific ways that you try to create a culture on your farm, I would love to hear some of those things. How about you, Raleigh?
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. Why don't you come back to me?
Yeah, sure. Anybody else want to chime in? Ryan?
Yeah, we create kind of a, I guess, employee buy-in by giving everyone responsibilities. If they feel like they're responsible for a part of the farm or they're on kind of an equal level with everyone, I feel like there's a lot more passion and involvement. So, for instance, we teach everybody how to drive the box truck. So there's always some scenario at the farm where we got to move vehicles or we got to fill in for somebody that's not going to market. Teach them how to drive the tractor. We teach them how to make invoices. We make sure like there's a lot of responsibility sharing on the farm. We also give them a chance to give us feedback at the end of, well, mostly at the end of the season. We have a farm retreat and we set up a bunch of paper on the walls and we just throw out things we do stop, start, and continues. So we have a place to start for the next year, and then everybody has a voice.
That reminded me of something that I heard in the other workshop that Taylor was a part of. And Taylor, I can't remember if this was you or somebody else in that panel, but a frustration wall or like a whiteboard where it's not necessarily like personal frustrations or interpersonal relationships, but like, man, it's really inefficient that I have to do this way. I wish it was fixed. And that way, when something like that happens in the moment, they can get it out. And this, also something that the farm owner or manager can do, but get it out right there. And then the people who are responsible for fixing those types of things have a list, which I think just sounds, we do something like that at the end of the year, but sometimes it's hard to remember what frustrated you, 2 months ago. Raleigh, did you want me to, go ahead, Taylor.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, that's us. And that's one thing I was gonna say, that we really try to create employee buy-in and have this feel like their farm too, but without the stress of owning it. And so we do a lot of things. I really like, did Raleigh say, or Ryan, the lead, I like that a lot because that's what I would like to, what I strive to create. And I like having that word for us. I think I'm going to start using that. Thank you. But we have people do lead in different areas so that they have ownership over little pieces. So a brand new employee is usually going to be the pig chore person, and they'll work with my husband directly. And so that is theirs. Like anything that they see that isn't working or could change or anything to be proud of, it's totally theirs. And then as they're here longer, we have different areas. Like next, probably they'd be the wholesale delivery person, so that I want them to know our customers so that they also feel, the compliments on the produce. I want them to share that. And then, they might run the greenhouse or things like that. We also have, whenever it's a group project, specifically in the wash pack, we have a different lead each day, and it's whoever is on triple wash because they get in there first. So any cut greens, and we call them the princess. So whoever's princess for the day gets to choose their music, and they get to, everything's on wheels, so they can set up the wash pack the way they want it, and they're kind of the point person for the day. And I think having that princess position has been our biggest team bonding thing, because you get to hear what music they like. And there's so much ownership over a wash pack day. And there are times where I'm like, oh, maybe we should just have a wash pack person though, because sometimes it gets confusing, but I just love the princess.
All right, I'm ready, Misha. Man, this is such good stuff. I'm really impressed with all the comments and suggestions. And I don't want to repeat what people are saying because so much of it is right on. So I'm going to just go in a slightly different direction. But it's been a challenge, a learning experience for me to shift from running an internship to managing employees. And so I think one thing that makes my farm run really smoothly in terms of management is actually not my management, but actually my farm plan. So I have a spreadsheet that has every single crop that's going to be planted for our vegetable farm that I make in now. And it's color coded, and it shows the seeding date, the estimated transplant date, and the estimated harvest window. And it's for every bed on the whole farm. So like before the season even starts, we already know where everything is going and when it's going to get seeded. And the number one thing is we just stay on schedule. And so there's a routine to our farm, and we do not get off schedule from it. Like that's the most important thing to make our CSA work, where we have to have consistent supply of product, is we have to stay on the seeding schedule, and then everything else follows from that. So I think that really organizes our farm so that in terms of how I manage things, it's a morning meeting. And the way I've shifted that morning meeting to have more autonomy, because the real difference with interns, they just want to be told what to do. They've never worked on a farm before, and they're just looking to you for everything. And that's not for everyone as a manager, but that's something I've always been comfortable with, because this farm is my baby and I run it really well, and you got to do the way that I have it set up because it works. And trying to find autonomy for a group of employees has been challenging because I have it so micromanaged and so well set up. So the way I've shifted it a little bit is I still have a list of what needs to get done today, but I've just stopped, telling, you do this, you do that. It's like everybody on my crew, they're employees, they have experience, they know how to do stuff. I let them decide who wants to do what, and if they want to work together or separately. And to the most part, what order they want to do things in. I usually have suggestions about that, but I've tried to let go of all of that the last 2 years. We switched away from internships because I didn't have time to do it with the COVID and my 3-year-old being home from childcare, and then we had a baby this last summer, right in the middle of the season. So I've had to rely on employees to make the farm run. And as Ryan said, having them invested, as Taylor said, like having them invested in the farm has been really important as leaders who can make decisions. But because I run such a tight ship, it's hard for them to really make major decisions because those are all already made. I decide what's in the CSA share every week, and it's tough for them to make that decision. I've actually offered weeks like, hey, do you want to run the CSA this week and make the decision? But it's so tight that like it's hard for them they would really would have to work overtime and be out there in the field, like making these plans outside of the workday to really be able to have that level of decision making. So we don't really have room for that. But in terms of the buy-in, really quickly, 2 things. One would be what Ariana said is really important. Don't hide your financials, and don't hide like your seed varieties or your fertilizer plan. Like, why are you hiding? Like, so many farmers like think these are like trade secrets. And if you want to have buy-in from your crew, like just tell them, be honest about, your bottom line of your farm, and like, they're your employees, not your competitors. And hopefully they're going to go on and start a farm. That's like why we're doing this. We're trying to spread the movement. So I've just had so many crew members say, you're the first farmer who's ever showed me your cash flow budget, or like who's told me what carrot variety you use or what fertilizers you put out there. And it just blows my mind. But that is the culture on a lot of these farms, that they feel like they have to keep these trade secrets. So don't do that. And then the second one, I've been struggling with this a little. I've been surprised a little bit of this, but like to get buy-in, I feel like I want people to go meet our customers either at the farmers market or at the CSA and actually like hand produce to people. Because if you're just working on the farm, it can be a grind, and you don't see the joy on people's faces when they get your product in their hands. So for me, that's always been something that helps people be more invested, is have them come with me to the market or run a farmer's market by themselves or do the CSA delivery. But it's not for everyone. We had a crew member this year who just didn't like that, person facing stuff. So what Ariana is saying about like everyone has a different style and a different way of getting feedback, I think is so true. I could tell you so many stories about crew members who've just surprised me. Like the feedback I give is not the right kind of feedback for them. And I've learned so much over the last few years about what Ariana is saying. Like it's so true. Everyone is different. So trying to learn as much as you can about them is so important in the beginning of the year.
Thanks, Raleigh. Super helpful. One of the things I want to cover in terms of building this kind of employee buy-in is something that just never occurred to me and just seems now so obvious when I hear other farmers doing it, but things like gear stipends. I've just kind of expected folks to like have the right boots or to have bibs. And I mean, my farm's a little bit different because we're not out harvesting veggies in the rain, but you know, we're doing wet, cold work with poultry harvesting and things. And so I think gear stipends make sense. I know some people have like a snack area where if the crew is hungry, they can just eat something. So what kind, or free produce, of course. What kinds of things like this are you guys offering? Ari, do you have something like that?
Yeah, I offer a gear stipend. I forget exactly what it was, but basically for my employee who was there 3 days a week, it was like $100 for the season. And then, and we have a short season, but for my employee that was there 2 days a week, it was a little bit less. So it's scaled. We have a snack box that I keep very well stocked, and that's part of what I ask people at the beginning of the season is like, what kind of snacks do you like? It's also really helpful. Like sometimes I notice that people wouldn't bring enough to eat for lunch, and so it's just practically part of what like helping people stay prepared to do the work that they need to do. Also, like any sort of peripheral safety stuff like sunscreen, or like this year we focus a lot on electrolytes because it was so hot. All that kind of stuff is available to the crew. My crew also has, they get a veggie box from our CSA program, and we also grow flowers. So at the end of the week, they could harvest as many flowers as they wanted, and keep them or share them with other folks. And one other thing I wanted, or a couple other things I wanted to add about just like culture and employee buy-in is that I always make people write down their goals at the beginning of the season, and then I'm tracking those really consistently. And then I try and figure out really early on like what people are good at, like what skills people are bringing to the farm. And so anytime there's an opportunity to highlight that person has a particular skill, I'll ask that person like, oh, I know you're really good at knots. Like, can you do a little tutorial for the whole crew? Or, one of our crew members was like, had a lot of botanical knowledge last year. And so would occasionally, like on Friday afternoons, we would sort of like walk through the flowers and do a mini lesson. So just providing a lot of opportunities for people to show what they're really good at and what they're knowledgeable about. And then I like to just randomly say, like, if I notice that somebody's doing something really well, I'll just be like, this bunch of beets is amazing, or I really like the way that you did this, or I noticed that like you cleaned up the wash pack really well. Because I think it can be really easy to just focus on when things aren't going right. And then like nobody wants to be on a crew where all you ever hear is the stuff that's going poorly. So I just try and be really cognizant of the things that people are really good at.
Taylor, do you offer gear stipends and freebies?
Yeah, I think our list is pretty similar. Except I really need to get better at snacks. I feel like my snack game was off this year, and we felt it. The other thing that we're starting to do is we have all employees are eligible for a simple IRA plan that we contribute to. There's a set rate per employee for a simple IRA. And then we used to do cash bonuses. Like if we had a phenomenal farmers market day, we'd do a cash bonus, and that was very motivating before COVID. But our crew, like people are different now, and mental health is such a big topic of conversation. It was our biggest concern with employees this past year. And so we're looking at perks in a little bit of a different way. Financial is a huge part of it. So doing those IRAs, and then instead of doing the cash bonus, doing a like a bigger picture, you know, if the farm hit its year goals, then we'll do a year-end bonus, which is intended to go into the IRA, because the IRA is a set percentage. So, you know, folks who have been here longer can get more money that way. We're also doing a financial literacy workshop with the folks who run the IRA program. So we got it set up with a mortgage, not a mortgage, with a, what are they called? Fancy money people. And part of it was that they're going to come out and do a workshop, which everyone is more excited about than anything I've ever offered. So it really, again, those perks are about knowing your crew and knowing where they're at in life. And, you know, maybe they need $100 more a month that you say to them is for their health insurance. You know, like, it's making those perks be really specific to the people feels very meaningful.
Wow, that is amazing. IRAs and financial well-being. That's awesome. Ryan?
Yeah, we do something similar to the stipend for gear for all of our employees. It helps having the right equipment. One thing we did this year that was new was Donut Friday. So we all took turns bringing either pastries or donuts to share, and we took like a snack break at 10 o'clock, the hungry hour. So that was really cool. And then we also provide a kitchen space, so we all have lunch together and take turns being chef. I figured it's pretty cheap to pay somebody for a half an hour to cook a meal for all of us, and then we're using the farm food. And I know people are staying healthy and eating the stuff that we grow, and then they're able to tell our customers how everything tastes and what their experience is going to be like. So that's been really helpful, and I think it's a big perk for everybody.
Awesome. Okay, we're getting low on time. I know we have some Q&A to do, but I would feel bad if we didn't at least touch upon when things go wrong, because they're going to go wrong sometimes. And so I'm curious, you know, first, like conflict resolution techniques, you know, obviously if you have more than one crew, there may be conflicts, especially as everyone is stressed out during the busy season. I'm wondering if you have plans in place, or, you know, specific methods of dealing with conflict on your farm, or if the whole idea is just to prevent it in the first place, probably. But Ari, does this come up for you?
Yeah, I mean, my strategy is to always deal with things as quickly as possible. I don't think it's good to let conflict fester, just for team morale and also just interpersonally. I think that, I don't know, conflict is not something that most people are skilled in, and it can be really hard. And I usually, if there's something coming up and it's persistent, I will ask a crew member to have a meeting, and I usually like to do that off the farm, actually, just to have a separate space. I feel like it's a little bit less loaded. And, you know, I usually will just start with like, I'm observing that this is happening. And, you know, what is your experience of it, so that I can understand, like, if it's a communication thing, is it my communication? Is it theirs? Is it like a mismatch of expectations? You know, I've had an instance where somebody was like, oh, I feel really disappointed by my role this season. And this is sort of what Taylor was talking about keeping everything documented. I was able to go back and like look at my notes from past meetings and say, like, here's what you told me you wanted. And so that's the expectation that I've been running off of. And that is divergent from what you're telling me now. And so I think it's just really good to do your due diligence, make sure things are documented as you go, and try to address concerns and conflicts like immediately when they come up. I also think, like, oftentimes I'm really aware, like, oh, everyone's really tired right now, so people are getting a little snappy, or you know, sometimes at the end of the day when it's really hot and it's super bright, like laying down Rime is tense. And sometimes those are moments where I think it's just helpful to be like, hey, I think everyone's really tired right now. I think, let's get this done and then we're going to go home, or just kind of like naming what's happening in the moment. But yeah, definitely make sure that you have all of your documentation and policies in place in case it is something that becomes sort of unresolvable or is no longer compatible with the culture and environment of the farm.
Yeah, I think boundaries is something that's important too. And I know for my own farm, we have some employees that have also become friends. And so it's hard sometimes to know what is appropriate as far as boundaries go and how do you maintain that. Is that something that's come up for you, Ryan or Raleigh?
Yeah, we've definitely had a lot of our workers in kind of a friend group or a network, which has been really nice because everybody seems to get along great. We haven't had a lot of conflict and issues, but a few times in the past, in our employee handbook, we have kind of our procedure for handling stuff that comes up, and it kind of borders on like a 3-strike scenario. The first time something happens, we have a casual conversation about it. The second time, say like, hey, we can't have this happen. The third time is termination. But what Ari said is really important. And I think we've just been really lucky. I've heard some horror stories from other farmers, and I feel lucky that we haven't had to deal with too much conflict. But I know it happens. I would say use your instincts. If you feel something, tension, address it right away. Don't let it fester, and don't let it take so long that the employee has to come to you. Try to bring it up. Be open.
All right.
Can I add
Well,
one quick little
yeah, please.
soundbite I heard recently? So I was in this day-long mental health and employees workshop-y thing recently, and because I think the majority of our conflict has come up when somebody's having trouble off the farm with something and they bring that in. And so something that somebody said that they do during their training, and it's in their employee handbook, is they talk about mental health and they say that, we are not mental health experts and we are not trained to deal with crises when they happen, minor or major, but we care about you. And so we want you to be able to come to us if something is happening and just say, I had a shitty day yesterday, or my dad's in the hospital, or whatever it is. And we can set something up for you. You can wash totes in the morning to be alone, or if you need time away from the group or whatever it is you need, we care about you. And I think that that is something that I'm really going to keep in mind going into this next season.
Yeah, that's really thoughtful. So I think there's obviously we could go on. I have more things on my list, but I think it would be good to answer some questions from folks in the audience. I know Jillian earlier in the chat wanted to know a little bit more about what is covered in safety meetings. I know, Ryan, you talked a bit about your safety meetings. Do you have specifics that you cover?
Yeah, I do some of the basics on safety stuff at the beginning of the season, especially just for a refresher. One is like harvest safety, how to hold a knife, and try not to cut yourself, that kind of stuff. The other thing is we move around a lot on the farm, so we have trucks and tractors, and we drive on the street. So it's safety about awareness, like cars coming by, bicyclists. Some of those are the main topics that we talk about. And then I open it up to the crew. I let them lead safety meetings. So things that they notice throughout their time at the farm that they want to bring up to everybody. Yeah, we basic stuff like lifting practices, slippery surfaces on the truck to watch out for. Yeah, that kind of answers your question, I hope.
Is that helpful,
Yeah.
Jillian? Oh, go ahead, Raleigh.
This is a little off topic, but one thing about safety, if you have kids, I've had some incidents with my 3-year-old that, well, he's 4 now, but that were super dangerous actually for the kid because kids are unpredictable. And I think you don't want to assume that even though you're comfortable with your child around, don't assume that your crew members are comfortable having your children out in the field with them. So that's a lesson that I learned in the last 2 years. I think you want to be really clear about safety with children. And then, if you're going to allow your kids to just roam free or hang out with the crew while they're working, you want to make sure your crew's comfortable with that so that there isn't any misunderstanding that could come up. I kind of took that for granted, and I think I made a mistake there.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I will note that for myself. All right, and then we had a question from Noah about part-time work. So this is something that we all struggle with, right? Like, do you only want full-time workers? Do you want to split? How do you find that right split? And then like, what are those expectations? So Noah said, any advice on offering part-time work? It was hard to get follow through to the hours we agreed on in the beginning of the season, but at the same time, she realizes that they didn't make a full commitment with part-time work. Do any of you have part-time? Does everybody have full and part-time? Does that, yeah, nodding. Yeah, somebody go ahead and chime in here.
We have a
Yeah,
few
but go ahead.
we had 4 part-time workers this year. Some are return employees, and other ones were volunteers. So for the volunteers, we had them sign up for the days that they were going to be there, knowing that it was like kind of a soft commitment being a volunteer, but we tried to get a commitment out of them. For the paid part-time employees, we had a definite set schedule, and if they were going to change, we'd kind of handle it like you would put a notice in to take vacation or something that we'd have to know like 2 weeks in advance or something, unless an emergency came up. But yeah, really hard to get a solid commitment out of part-time employees. I think it's easier if they're returning, they know what to expect on the farm and how the season kind of rolls and progresses. But if they're new to your farming operation, I think just being really clear about it and having some sort of written agreement so that you both can reference it throughout the year.
Yeah, I would just be wary. I would recommend not hiring part-time employees that don't have experience because you're not going to have as much time to train them. We've had this problem before where they've been a drag on our crew. So if you are going to have a part-time employee, I would have someone who has a lot of experience or has a very specific job so that, that training portion can be minimized.
That's great advice. I know for a lot of farmers starting out, it's hard to even imagine finding the time to manage somebody full-time or even how to afford it. So a lot of folks do start with that part-time. And Noah's also asking to hear about sick leave policies. So did you change anything in response to COVID? I can say for my farm, we offer kind of whatever is required by Washington State for sick. And I think there are COVID requirements that by law, and then also I think that the state has funding available if one of your staff, if they're out because they're sick from COVID. But do any of you have specific policies that you've maybe modified in light of the pandemic? No. Has anybody had to deal with workers being out? I mean, I don't want, private information to get out, but like, has that been an issue where suddenly you have somebody who's out for 10 days because they had a scare or a positive test or maybe like a close encounter with somebody else? And how did you manage that?
I feel like we had one a week. It was ridiculous. exposures. Nobody actually got affected directly, but we we had the PPP money, so we were paying people in 2020 for COVID sick days. We did not do that this last year, and it didn't affect us as much, but I don't know what we're gonna do, because I feel like we need to be able to keep paying people. We have somebody right now who's been out most of the winter because of exposures, and I'm at this point, like, they need to make money. But I can't at this time of year pay them for not working. So I don't know what the answer is there. We are talking about over hiring for next season because we had so many issues with people being sick or injured or exposed, and someone was also on vacation all at the same time, and it just sucked too much. And so yes, I think we're going to do more part-time people next year.
Just to kind of second what Taylor said, we also had what seemed like somebody out every week because of exposure or a legitimate illness. Nobody got COVID, but we were super cautious. I could just feel how cautious the crew wanted to be about the whole thing, which I respect and had to abide by. But it was tough to cover shifts, especially when we had heavy harvest days. And some days we just had to tell customers, like, hey, we don't have the workforce, and we're just going to shut down for the day, or we're going to bump our restaurant deliveries until the end of the week when people are here because of sickness, and we're just being cautious. It's tough, but like making those calls makes the crew feel safer.
Strange times we're in. Does anyone have any other questions? You're welcome to unmute and chime in. You don't have to drop it in the chat. I want to be mindful of the time, but I know some of our panelists have agreed to stay on later if we need them to.
I'm surprised this hasn't come up. How many of you guys use walkie-talkies or have strong opinions about them? Does anyone have a negative opinion of walkie-talkies?
They die too soon.
Well, yeah, or they fall in the wash tub. Yeah.
But they are essential.
Yeah. I think I brought that up because the biggest challenge for me with managing crew is training people to know when to ask a question and when to make the decision themselves. I think there's a really fine line there. Like, they don't want to bother me all the time, but at the same time, I don't want them to do something that's really dumb. So having a walkie-talkie has been really helpful, because if they just have a really quick question, they're not sure, should I do this or that? Just shoot the question out to the group. A nice thing about walkie-talkies too is then everybody gets to hear what the question is. So everybody learns because you're all on the same channel. I have found it really helpful. It was essential for the first COVID summer when I had to farm from my house because I was the childcare for our kid. And it was really hard. I mean, that's why I said the negative of walkie-talkie, because I got short with people on the walkie-talkie, like they couldn't see my face. So it was like they thought I was being rude or upset at them but it was just, I could not explain things to people over a walkie-talkie that I could do when I'm actually out there. So there was some misunderstandings over the walkie-talkie that we had, but that was just because it was the year it was. But in general, it's been really helpful to have them. I agree with Taylor. I wish they were more durable. The button just stops working. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, talking about just like, how does the crew get a hold of you? You know, I have a second job, and so I'm in my bedroom office, either working for farm stuff or this other job, and I have this window back here that y'all can't see right now, but employees will like walk up to my window to ask me questions, and like that's not ideal either. So the walkie-talkie, I mean, we all have cell phones too, right? So sometimes even just text messaging, but that's a funny comment, Taylor, that you can kind of hear who else is using their walkie-talkies around town. Any other questions before we sign off?
I'd like just to add something.
Sure.
I think one of the important things that you mentioned, the biggest reasons for successful retention, how do you find the unicorn? I don't think there is a unicorn, uh, a, a person like that, but I think being extremely patient and listening is the most important thing. I've asked my crew, like, hey, why do you like working here? What makes it different than going to a different farm or, a different workplace? And they just said, like, you're super patient and you don't get upset when stuff happens that goes wrong, which is really hard. Like, you crash the truck, okay. Don't get upset. Um, I think that's been really helpful in my scenario, and the employees respect that. So I'd say just keep that in mind. Just keep it cool. Figure out a way to take a deep breath and manage the situation in a calm manner.
Yes, this is a perfect way to go out, Ryan. Thank you. I did forget to bring this up. So as far as retention goes, for the rest of you, what do you think the biggest reasons are for if you have successful retention? What do you think that is? Like, what's the one lesson you want people to go home with tonight? Do you want to go, Ari?
It's kind of a tricky question for me because I have a couple Workshare people that have been with me for like 5 years. And I don't feel great about having Workshare people necessarily, but they really want to be there and it's really helpful to have them there. But otherwise, financially, and because of our farm's in a floodplain and is unfarmable from October to April generally, I can't really retain employees over the winter currently. So I think my biggest challenge really is just the economic one. Like, my crew members would have stayed with me if I could have paid them through to next year. But I do think one of the things I've been thinking throughout this conversation is just like, as the boss, you're the one that's responsible. So like, when a conversation needs to happen, you need to be the one to initiate it. Or if somebody brings a frustration, you need to be the one to be responsive and to resolve that, unless you have some other system for allowing your crew to resolve things. But I think like what Ryan just said around like being the sort of one that is emotionally modulating throughout the season can be really challenging, but I do think that's a really important role, is to just know that you're the one that sets the tone for everybody else, and that whatever you have to do to make sure that you're in a good place during farm days, or if you're not, like stepping away and taking a breath and coming back to the situation, I think is really important for people wanting to actually be there.
Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about is like, when you have an employee who makes a mistake, as a business owner, the question should be, what did I do that enabled this mistake, right? Not automatically assuming your employees should know better, but like, why did this happen? And how do I prevent it from happening in the future? Because obviously I didn't give the right direction, or I wasn't clear enough, Taylor, do you have any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I mentioned that Radical Candor book, so it's on my mind, but I like how she differentiates between rock star employees and it's late and I can't even remember the other one because I want the rock stars, but there's like a rock star and a rising star or something like that. And the rock star is the person who you can just depend on no matter what. And they're just reliable. They don't really have any aspirations besides to come to work and do a good job. And then there's the like rising star person who superstar. The superstar is the one who is like, this is a stepping stone to something else. They want to learn a skill, or they want to get work experience, or they want, a job title or whatever it is, and to really identify who is in which position. And that can change through the time that they're with you, but then knowing what it means for them to stay happy in their job. So really having tons of conversations with people about what is working for them and what is making them happy to stay. Like, do you want to keep learning here? Is there something I can still teach you? Or have I taught you everything that you can learn here and you need to go on? And I think that has been, we haven't had a word for it, but I think that's been the biggest key to our retention so far, has been really catering people's roles and experiences to what they need in that time. And I am going to go to bed. So,
Yes. Thank you so much for
everybody.
joining us. Raleigh, do you want to give us some parting words?
Sure. I think I saw this on Taylor's Instagram feed, but everybody should check out this notourfarm.org. It's really well done zine that has a lot of just compilation of comments from folks who work on farms but are not farm owners. It was really helpful for me to read through it and get some perspectives from folks about what it's like to not be the farm owner. One thing I forgot to mention that worked really well this year was I actually crowdfunded bonuses for my crew. I just sent an email to my CSA members and said, hey, it's a pandemic. It's been a tough year. I wish I could pay my crew more. I give them a bonus, but it's never enough, especially this year with inflation, et cetera. It was a really simple email. And I just said, Venmo me some money and I'll make sure it gets to my crew. And holy crap, we got a lot of money. And people were like, thank you for giving me this opportunity to give your crew a bonus. I was like, okay. So that was really successful. I don't do a lot of crowdfunding stuff always because I feel awkward about it, but this worked really well. And then finally about the internship program, if you have an intern in the state of Washington, if you want to hire them back for the next year, they need to be an employee. They need to be hourly wage. So I just wanted to get that in there. That is the law. And I think that's the way it should be. And hopefully that works for some of you to hire on an intern for a second season.
Awesome. This was so great. For those of you listening in, if you haven't dropped your email address in the chat, put it in there now, or you can send it to me in a private message if you prefer, but that way I can make sure to give you the resources and the follow-up. And a huge thank you to our panelists. That was so insightful. You guys are awesome. And yeah, just looking forward to staying in touch. And thanks so much, everybody, for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.